Jerry, is public diplomacy essentially a waste of time?
It's not a waste of time, but I think it has, I guess, in the margins. I would agree with that. A couple of reasons come to mind. The first is, I mean, if you visited a U.S. embassy anytime in the last 10 years, and you look what a fortress it's become, you sort of despair of the idea that somebody who works within that organization is going to reach out into the country, whatever country, and actually have some meaningful contact with people. I mean, it must be phenomenally frustrating for people who are in either the diplomatic business or the public diplomacy business to think that from that fortress they're going to actually, create some real links with people in the country and explain America. So there's that. The second thing is, I think it's a little naive to think that it's really needed. I mean, we are in a global world now. You got to go pretty far afield before you can't get CNN International, for example, or I think the idea that people are ignorant of what the U.S. is doing somewhere out there in the world is becoming a little quaint. I think that people understand what it is, and I guess I would agree with Walter. A lot of them have problems with not the image of America, but the policies of America, and that's fair enough. That it is what it is, and I think you can sort of affect that, but probably not in a big way. And I think your ability to affect it diminishes as the internet and global communications and a global economy make it apparent to lots of people what's going on. They don't have to be educated so much as they used to. And then the third thing, and I've always felt this strongly, and Walter's idea about the running into the students in Iran sort of reinforces it. I have always thought, and I continue to think, the one program that really does matter is allowing foreign students into the U.S. Come here, live here, spend not 4 days, but 4 years here, see everything that America has, good, bad, and otherwise, and everybody that you run into overseas who has the best understanding, and usually it's positive, but it's balanced, are people who've gone to school here. And the post 9/11 effect that I worry about the most in this regard is the difficulty people have getting visas to come here to go to school. I think that is the single best human-to-human contact the U.S. has to offer, and I do think that is being sort of choked off.
And of course, there are 2 Iranian academics in prison right now,
right,
who are essentially engaging in soft power, to use that term, and does that sort of thing work? Would it work with the current Iranian
Well, it
regime?
tells you the current Iranian regime is scared that it might work, and so I think that's one of the reasons that they are in prison. I mean, it's in a way a sort of a backhanded acknowledgement that sort of contact really could make a difference. I don't think they think they were plotting to overthrow the Iranian government. I don't think that's it at all. It's the idea that these are powerful person-to-person contacts, to use David's term.
Right. Walter?
Let me take that point for a minute, because the irony of it is wonderful. That we send people over to teach democracy who are Americans, and we send them to a country like Iran when our national policy passed by our Congress is to overthrow that government. We have voted to change that regime. I don't know how many are old enough to remember the Smith Act, but we went after communists in this country because they belonged to a party that wanted to overthrow the government. So that if you're the Iranian leader and want to control your own country, this is a threat to you. And we felt the same way when people were coming after us. So it is this idea of trying to understand the atmosphere. We're sending people over to teach democracy to a country which we have made our policy to overthrow. But let me talk to the sort of public policy business. When USIA was functioning during the Cold War, and in the post-World War II period, it's wonderful about being old, there were libraries that we encouraged people to come into and read about America. We had the Voice of America, you could listen to it. There was not this kind of banging away. I think the recent view of public diplomacy comes out of the atmosphere in this country where advertising is so important to selling products. And we're selling foreign policy like we're going to sell a product. And it's repetition and all the rest of it. I've had fun on occasion writing pieces about some of the contracts we put out in Iraq by the military who are trying to do polls to find out how they can better sort of sell themselves. There's a story we have in the works about studies that were done in this country for the Pentagon of how soldiers ought to sell themselves
Do
locally.
you think it's a good thing, or it's kind of silly?
It's silly. It works in this kind. I mean, soldiers in a foreign, they're occupiers. I mean, it's like the Germans going into France and saying, you know, appreciate the SS, they're helping you.
There was a great
They're arresting, we are holding now, just Americans, we're holding in 2 prisons in Iran, 18,000 Iraqis that we have picked up. And they are in 2 American prisons. And we have a system of sort of deciding who's who, but we're in a foreign country, a sovereign country, but holding 18,000 Iraqis. So the idea that relatives of those people, whether they're fighting us or not fighting us, that they're going to look at us with favor is lunacy. It's also a country that has forced out occupiers for centuries. So that's kind of nuts. And I think what's tied to the current view of public diplomacy is what happens in this country, but not just advertising for products, but political advertising, which has taken over our whole sort of election system. And so people's ideas are shaped by slots.
Can I just pick up on something? Because clearly one of the challenges the next president is going to face is failed nation states. Whether Iraq is the most problematic, but you know there are a multitude of failed nation states, and whether it's Darfur or anything else. And the question is, and there are going to be calls that U.S. troops, U.S. diplomats, U.S. social workers should get involved in these nation states. And I guess I'm a little less pessimistic that that's impossible because they'll be seen as foreigners and occupiers. And I'm not sure how we're going to do that, but that clearly is going to be a huge challenge for the next president. And I'm not sure, you know, we're in this moment of fluid sovereignty. And part of the fluid sovereignty is trying to establish some way that Americans can play a role in failed nations that's a productive role that's not seen as occupiers, including American military troops.
Can you think of an example in recent history where that has actually happened?
Where Americans have played a positive role in
Yes.
Germany, Japan, South Korea, France, Belgium, Netherlands.
In the last 20 or 30 years.
Well, I think in Yugoslavia.
Okay. That's a good point.
And
That's a good
the
point.
Czech Republic, probably.
Right. So it is possible to stick your nose in other people's business and not have them hate you and have it come out positive. So,
They may still hate you, by the way, but it can come out less unpositive than it might otherwise.
okay. Less unpositive. If you considered running for office,
You're the only person who thinks so.
But on the one hand, we have hard military power, which this administration has used, and others, of course. And on the other hand, we have soft, mushy public diplomacy. But it seems there must be a range in the middle of tools at the disposal of the U.S. administration. Maybe it's aid, maybe it's smarter diplomacy. And I thought maybe we could explore that middle ground for a minute, and I'll take anyone who might want to suggest, like, what can a U.S. president do that is not, on the one hand, invading a country, and the other hand, resorting to Madison Avenue advertising, which most of us agree here is effective only on the margins at the most.
Well, I'll start. I mean, it seems to me that you start by thinking outside the box a little bit. I mean, I was thinking about this today, and a story that a colleague of mine, Michael Phillips, did a week or 10 days ago out of Zambia came to mind. Some of you may have seen it. You know, one of the things you want to do in Africa, for example, is create a middle class. It's, you know, there's enough economic development that's happening in some countries where it's now possible. It's stabilizing politically. It tends to engender better relations with the U.S. It also happens to stabilize Africa, which has got a lot of problems. So anyway, having a middle class in Africa is a good idea. Well, it turns out one of the problems with having a middle class in Africa is there's no system, there's no real investment banking system the way we know it. One of the things that means is nobody can get a mortgage to build a house. And so the way you build a house in Africa, Michael's story reported, is you work, you save a few dollars, then you go and build a layer of the house. And then you have to fall back, you stop, and the house sits half built for a while until you gather up some more money, then you go put the next layer of bricks on.